Hello, I'm Robin Ince, and today I'm interviewing Louise Jameson. There we are. That's it. Now we can just start talking. It's fine.
Okay.
I took some advice actually from my mate, who I know you've worked with as well, Toby Haydoke.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because I was like, oh, right, what questions have been asked 12,000 times? Because I know, I have actually, some people sent me some questions and said, can you ask this? I know she's answered it before, but I really like the answer. So if that does happen, there might be, there might be, it might be at times these are greatest hits that they that they want as well.
Okay. I hope I give the same answer and I wasn't lying before.
Oh, well, that's a lovely thing Mark Steele does. Comedian Mark Steele, he has always lied about how he became a stand-up comedian because he got asked by local newspapers so many times. So there's so many different stories about, oh, I used to do all these jokes on this ferry that I used to captain, and people started just getting their cars on the ferry so that they could hear me do my routines. But one day I got carried away and I crashed the ferry. And he's just got all that. And so depending on which part of the world you live in, your local paper will have another story about how Mark got into showbiz.
His knowledge of the geography of Britain must be absolutely brilliant now.
Yeah, and he always has that thing as well about local radio where he'll always walk on and go, has anyone come here because they listen to Radio Norwich? and no one puts their, why on earth do I do interviews with all these bloody places? Well, I'll tell you what. I want the first thing actually I did want to ask you was but this is all kind of a bit of synchronicity or coincidence because I about 2 weeks ago I was watching Horror of Fang Rock before I knew that I was going to be talking to you, and the first thing that struck me was how funny your characterization of Leela is. That I think Leela is the funniest. It's like I think it's I think you have a line which you might remember, but it's something like, you said this was Brighton. If it is Brighton, I do not like it. As you land on this phone, and I've now gone back and obviously watched a lot more episodes, and that's the thing that really stands out to me, which is it's a tremendously you really have fun with the comedy of being this person taken from a more savage planet and then just popped into, whether it's Victorian London or whether it's in the middle of a kind, the robots of death, whatever it is. There's a and how aware were you of that right from the start?
Well, I think what I was aware of with Leela was her lack of censorship between her brain and her mouth, and not knowing social conformity. So she's a highly intelligent young woman without any education. So everything is taken at face value. She doesn't really understand wryness or sarcasm, or everything's very, very literal. I had a student once who arrived 5 minutes late for his class. And I went, "Oh, you're nice and early." And he went, No, I'm late. It's 5 past. And I think Leela has a bit of that. She just doesn't get irony at all. And I think that is very funny in itself, but it's based in truth. I wouldn't say I set out to make Leela comedic in any way, but you work with those brilliant writers that we had, and mine it for anything that you can, or you're given a prop like a sofa. Well, she'd never have seen a sofa, so I can't have her sitting on it properly. I get cross-legged on it or kneel on it, or just find something different, because I have to kept reminding myself it's the first time she'd have seen a lot of stuff ever.
Did you have a sense of the idea that, because also another thing about Leela, I think, is the strength of the personality. I think, there are assistants who are very much kind of assistants, and as we know, there's always the cliches of the people who are more often than not told, and at this point you scream or you fall over. And that was never part of that's one of the things that I love at Return to that is you are such a strong, and as you said, such a smart character as well.
Yeah, she's clever. I did scream when I got ate by a giant rat, but I sort of defy anybody not to scream under those circumstances. But I did cross out several Leela screams in the script and just went, can we just hold on to her being a bit more proactive, really? bit more, because there was no way I could have replaced Liz Sladen. You know, she was the darling of everybody's heart. She gave such a wonderful performance as the companion, and I think they were quite right to kind of move away from that. You don't want to replicate that. So, you know, let's make her this sort of uneducated jungle animal and see where it takes us. I think it could have been exploited a bit more, really. I mean, I think Big Finish have exploited it beautifully. I've done far more on audio than I've ever done in front of the camera. I mean, I don't know exactly how many stories I did, but it wasn't very many.
But don't worry, there's someone out there who definitely knows.
She did 6.
Yeah, that was what I was talking about this with Alex, who's recording this a little bit earlier, about a couple of occasions. I did Mastermind recently, and someone said to one of the...
That's brave.
I know, I only did it because lockdown, and I'll do anything. So I've turned it down, and I was like absolutely terrified, and it was the most. And all I kept thinking was, if I don't beat Joe Pasquale, I am going to be in so much trouble. I will tell you nothing about what happened. But
what was your specialist subject? Can you tell me that?
I wanted to do the novels of Kurt Vonnegut, and then fortunately they talked me out of that. And then I was going to do Rick Mayall, because I love Rick Mayall so much. And
yeah.
They said, oh, there's not an official biography, so you can't do it. So I basically did the young ones. So I sat with my 12-year-old son and watched the young ones every episode about 27 times. And it didn't get boring. It was a delight, you know. But it was that. But one of the team said, "Oh, the worst moment is when someone says, 'Can we do Doctor Who?' and you go, 'Oh God, the number of people who are going to write in and say, actually, the 2nd of November, 1967.'" You know. I mean, you must have had that. You must have, because I would imagine, especially for something like Doctor Who, you may be doing Q&As and you give an answer and it's your life and you've lived, but you don't know it as well as those who've seen The Sunmakers or whatever many more times than you have.
My favourite story, by the way. But what the joy of those conventions is that you have such a dedicated fan base there who really like nothing better than when I go, "I'm so sorry, I can't remember. Someone out there tell me." And they do, and they're accurate, they're right. You know, I would much prefer to ask for a prompt than to kind of try and bullshit my way out of a question that I don't know the answer to. Because as you say, there's a million people out there that can do the mastermind on it.
When did you become aware? I mean, I suppose I was thinking of firstly in terms of when you took the part of Leela. I would imagine that after that first Saturday, did you, from Sunday onwards, walking out, or especially Monday morning, did you think, oh, everything's different now? Did it feel like that, carrying the weight of that, with Doctor Who being so big at that time?
There was a point when we were recording before it had gone out, and the Evening Standard warned the BBC that they were going to preempt the press launch. That was on a Tuesday night. So on a Wednesday, we were in the studio. So they tried to scupper the Evening Standard by getting all the press in on the Wednesday. So that Wednesday, I was press, recording. In my tea break, I had an interview, recording. We went on whatever the 6 o'clock news was. The TARDIS materialized and Tom and I walked out on that. And then we were recording till 10:30 at night. It was the craziest day. And then the next day, then it was all a bit odd. There were people that got hold of my phone number. There were people coming out of the woodwork that I hadn't spoken to for years, suddenly claiming to be my best friend. There was all that weird razzmatazz that goes around being, for want of a better word, a celebrity. It was odd. And I have such a love-hate relationship with being well known. There's part of me. There was a time when I was doing Bergerac and I was on the beach, and I've been filming all day. I was on the beach with my 2 kids. The sun was setting and it was just me and my boys, and we were rock pooling and da-da-da. And someone came hurtling across the beach to me. And in my heart, I was like, oh, can I just have 10 minutes? Anyway, this person ran straight past me. They were going to someone completely different. And there was something in my heart that went, oh, oh, they weren't after me then. And I didn't like it. And I thought, yeah, take note, Louise. Be really grateful for what life is giving you here. Don't ever get bored with it. Don't ever take it for granted. Because without an audience, we are nothing. There's no point in rehearsing if you're not going to put the play on, is there? I mean, you've got to have such respect for your audience, I think.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It does seem to be a very difficult line, because I certainly know other people as well who go, they really want people to see the work and they want people to be interested, but the idea that is always going to continue, that people will want to ask you that if you are, for instance, if you are rude, I remember Harry Enfield telling a story about, he was having trouble with his car, he was by a cliff and he was trying to mend it and he was getting really furious, and then this bloke just walked past and went, "You don't want to do that, do you?" And of course, he just wanted to have a moment of bonding with someone that he loved, Harry Enfield. Of course, Harry Enfield went, "Oh, you!" And then afterwards, he thought, oh, all he wanted was, he thought, oh, look, there's Harry Enfield who I love. Oh dear, it's just that. Yeah, I can see that being a huge problem, and it's but
you just have to be on. You just have to be on all the time. And the EastEnders it's all died down now. But EastEnders was it was at its height, and then it was, I would avoid pubs because drunkenness combined with recognition can be quite tough to deal with. I mean, you must have had this too.
Only when I stand next to Brian Cox,
who I adore.
It's fun, yeah. I've watched it. That's the thing that I find interesting. I always find it interesting when I've seen some of my friends who become well known. And with Brian, for instance, there was a point we were at a science festival, and I had to say to him, I said, "Brian, you can't stop now when you answer the phone anymore," because he'd just gone that extra. Because as I'm sure you've seen, there's that bit where people are generally very nice, but if someone stops, eventually they go, "That is, isn't it? Oh, go on." And then they'll go, and then once one person's done that, 100 come in because the permission's been given. And it was quite an interesting. I've always found it. Fortunately, no one knows who I am and no one cares. So I'm in a very, but I've still got some work, so it all balances out. I wanted to go back a bit. Actually, there was something that I wanted to. Don't worry, it's not going to be Disciple of Death, though I may well mention that very briefly.
You're on dodgy territory there.
Oh God, it's just I didn't know about that, and I did notice it also wasn't on your website, and it was. I've not seen that. I know it's a Mike Raven film, so I was immediately intrigued because I know horror fans have such. But I wanted to go back 1 year before that, and I realised that some of the things I talk about, you might say, you know what, it was one day's work. It was that was it. But I was because you did Marty Feldman's Comedy Machine, and I'm. The last interview that I did with Tim Britt Taylor, we talked a great deal about Marty Feldman, and I love him more and more and more. And his book, I, Marty, the autobiography that was found in the attic when his wife died. And I think he's almost someone that a whole number of generations don't even know who Marty Feldman is, and he was a genius. So that would have been one of your first TV jobs?
It was the first one that went out. It was actually the second one that I recorded. It wasn't just one day, it was one line. And the line was, "Dead cats turn me on." And he was a rock star, and I had to paint his boot with nail polish and say, "Dead cats turn me on." And my agent said, "Will you call me? Because I want to know if you get a punchline, because if you get a punchline, you get more money." So I gave her a ring and I said, "This is my line." And she said, "Is it a punchline?" I went, "I've absolutely no idea." I don't know why I'm saying it. And they dubbed in some laughter after it. So it obviously was a punchline. But he was the kindest. He knew I was really green, raw, didn't know how to hit a mark or a light, or was a bit nervous about talking to him, all that. He could not have been kinder. He really couldn't. He was completely embracing of the whole, just my nervousness. He was absolutely delightful.
I'm really pleased to hear that, because that's simply when I was chatting with Tim, both he and his wife, their face just lit up when he was mentioned. I think he's such a. There's a beautiful in his book. He taught. It's actually not him, obviously, but it was. I think Graham Chapman, because he tried to keep him alive when he was dying. And this incredible last words. He said, could Graham say to his wife that he was so pleased that he got to meet her because she was so lovely that he meant he never had to put his thing in anyone else. And I just thought that there is such beauty in that, and such cheekiness and such rudeness, and just all of that together, I thought was
delightful, isn't it? Yeah.
So in those early days, it was. I wondered how it was, because when you're certainly looking back at quite a lot of the TV of the 70s, there are a lot of female parts which are generally they're underwritten. They are, kind of they're parts which are addressing. When you first were, the first small parts in television, how did you manage to navigate through those kind of things? How do you able to work out, or did you just go for everything and just see what happened?
I was very reliant on my agent, Carol James, her name was, who's no longer an agent. And she really scooped me up from drama school and just kind of steered me through those first. I was with her for 9 years, actually. And very early on, my ambition was to get into the Royal Shakespeare Company. And so very early on, she sent me off for an audition for the New World Theatre season. And it wasn't till I walked out of the audition room that I saw a plaque on the door which said Royal Shakespeare Company rehearsal rooms. I rang her up and I said, have I just auditioned for the RSC? She said, yes, I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd be too nervous. So I was really, I was handled very carefully. And I got in, and I spent the next 3 years with the RSC. So a lot of those formative years of my career, I felt like I'd gone back to college with yoga classes, voice classes, working with the best on the best, So incredibly fortunate with the John Barton and Cicely Berry and, all these people that are just icons in the theatre world. Ian Richardson was in my company, and yes, absolutely. And Beatrix Lehman, no longer with us, just before that, I did a lot of kind of very small parts, Z cars, which was based on a true story about a young woman who kicked a gay man to death and was too vain to throw away her boots. They were still covered in blood. That's how they got her. So it was based on a true story. And I did Tom Brown's School Days, played the maid that Flashman was, got Tom Brown packed off to boarding school because he defended the maid, when she was being exploited. So I got some really kind of nice, they were tiny, but they were really lovely little juicy parts that showed a versatility. And then, as I say, straight into classical training. And then my agent said TV series. And that's when Doctor Who came along. So I turned down all theatre work and deliberately looked for a TV series. I got down to the last 10 for Purdy. But, who wants Joanna Lumley's career? And I was nearly in Angels, and I was nearly in Survivors, got very close to them. It's thanks to Survivors that I got Doctor Who, because Pennant Roberts was casting and he auditioned me, and I wasn't right for Survivors, but he remembered me and called me in to audition for Leela. So that's how that happened.
So was that, in terms of, because you were, it's quite a short time in Doctor, a season and a half, really, and I know you went straight into theatre again. How early on were you thinking, I can't do this for too long? This is, I want to get back to theatre. Was the idea that if you stay in too long, then you become this kind of, almost like a genre actor, or you become too, that's who you are. Oh, it's Leela. We can't. Was that in your mind quite early on?
I've always had in my mind, don't be longer than 2 years off the stage, because it's the stage that keeps you match fit. It keeps your long-term memory working. It keeps the muscle memory working. It keeps the spontaneity working. Once that's in your DNA, that whole Meisner philosophy of cause and effect, of really listening and really, just really working in every fibre of your being, working properly. So you have to think so technically when you're in front of a camera. If you're working at a pace, you don't have, you don't have the luxury of pushing it through into your DNA. But you can when you're in a series, of course, you get to know the characters so well that the script can come in like icing on the cake. You can know how to enter it very, very quickly. But the reason, so I wouldn't have stayed for more than 2, maybe 2.5 seasons, but it's no secret. So I'm going to preface this with saying I absolutely adore Tom now, and we get on incredibly well. And we've had, a long talk about why it didn't work quite so well back in the day. It just was, it was hard. It was hard. It was a hard job to do and stay light and frothy and happy. And I did have a lot of offers coming in. So it seemed to me, I've done a season and a half. It's done me all the favors it can do. I never knew it would turn into my pension, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And I've learned to love it much more since I left it than when I was in it, if I'm really honest.
Well, I know a lot of people are interested to know about how it changed when, for instance, going back and making shows with Big Finish, to return to a character over 20 years later. What was the difference in terms of? I mean, that's what I love about some of the Big Finish stuff is suddenly you have these resurrection and of course because it's audio, the budget is enormous for every single set. But returning to play Leela, what had changed in terms of your perception of her when you were doing it?
I think my favourite part ever was Blanche in Tenko, which was set in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and I played a prostitute, working class, tough character who was incredibly like Leela. If you analyse them both, both uneducated, both intelligent, both feisty, both brave, incredibly brave, both able to fight, literally and emotionally. And I think every part you do, I think what I'm trying to say is every part you do, of course, I come to it with a more mature approach and with a better technique now because I've been in the business 50 years. But the essence of her is still exactly the same. I've always had a Stanislavski approach to my work of a hope of being absolutely truthful. And it's all to do with reacting. It's not to do with acting. It's all to do with why you're doing something, not how you're doing it. And because I'd also chosen for Leela this rather odd rhythm of speaking, no contractions, I wouldn't say wouldn't, I would say would not. So there was that technical hook to clip straight back onto through the ear. And once I'd done that, and I just have to lift my voice a little bit to make it youthful again, because it's got deeper over the years. It's all those days of smoking, I think. So yes, as long as I'm aware technically that I keep her youthful and use that voice rhythm, everything else slips into place.
Well, I know because you brought up Tenko, we had a question for which was such an amazing. I remember when I saw that for the because that was a huge. I remember the launch of that, and that felt very big and kind of such an important piece of work. But a young fan, Mark Gatiss, has sent me a question.
Oh, I see.
And Mark wants to know where would Blanche have gone if she'd stayed in Tenko.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? If she'd been in the special at the end when the war was over, I think she'd probably have gone into business with Dorothy, the character Dorothy, who went from and played brilliantly by Veronica Roberts, who went from uptight middle class parent to prostitute throughout the course of the war. And because of that, teamed up rather well with Blanche. She kind of came to Blanche's level, but then Blanche taught her everything she knew. And I think they could have kind of gone into business together. That's what would have happened.
Did it feel when you were making that? Because to me, I don't know what age I was when they came out, but here was
81.
a piece of drama that was, yes, I'd have been 11 years old, and I would have,
Ooh,
and I
too
remember
young.
it was one of those things that here was a piece of drama which was entirely female dominated. It was, so many of the other things that might be sometimes used as crutches in there, and it felt at that point to be quite an important. There was a statement in there as well.
And I think there was a statement for present day. 1976 was the Equal Rights Bill. So this is 5 years after we would only just been allowed to buy our own property. Yeah, literally. So there was that thing of having a dozen women in a rehearsal room. It just doesn't. Burkwatt thought he'd died and gone to heaven, basically. Walked in with these gorgeous women every day. But they still did things like, they would, because we all had to be skinny. We had to sign a thing saying we wouldn't put on any weight. They weighed us every morning, put our weight up on a chart on the wall. I don't think it would be allowed now. They did order us special meals as well, non-fattening meals. They kind of took care of us, but it was like, it's kind of, we were being dictated to. There was one story. So we were in a prisoner of war camp. And we were about 10 days into rehearsal, and our producer called us to the corner and he said, would we go home? Get this. He's got 12 career women he's talking to. Would we go home and ask permission of our husbands, boyfriends, lovers to not shave our armpits or our legs? Because, of course, in a prisoner of war camp, there wouldn't be a razor blade and we wouldn't be able to keep our skins. As if we hadn't started to grow the hair. As if... So there's this terrible silence. Jean Ann Crowley goes, would you like a written letter of consent? And then when we got to filming, she had some little, I don't know if you'd call them wigs, prosthetics made of these kind of hairy armpits. She put, is this long enough for you, Ken? So I think they found it quite hard to, keep us under control, really. It was the beginning of men having to watch their language, really.
That is those armpit wigs. I know when there was a Peter Wingard auction a while ago, Mark Gates and I were talking about the fact that both of us, had our eyes on buying Peter Wingard's toupee, which was a monthly auction item.
Was it really?
Yeah. Oh, it had everything. It was one of those auctions which even had things like a box of receipts that Peter has made some notes on. It was just everything, and also some lovely. A friend of mine got some lovely gaudy costume jewelry as well, and all of these kind of naked paintings of women that must have been up there to kind of work as a bit of a front, I suppose. But I was just thinking of Mark's love of a good merkin, for instance. When you think of Louise Jameson, some of the incredible pubic hair that we saw in that the idea that somewhere there might still be Tenko underarm pubic hair wigs. I think this might become, this could be the fifth Indiana Jones movie, to be quite honest. I think there's that's fantastic. I wanted to ask you again. This is I've not been able to get hold of this. I tried to get hold of it from a friend, but I saw that shortly before Doctor Who, you were in a play for today called The Peddler, and just because it starred one of my favourite actors of all time, who is John Hurt, and I just wondered if you had any memories of making that.
I do. I had. It was about, and the scandal still goes on today. It was about someone from selling medicine to doctors as the cure-all for everything, with money as their motivation instead of people's health as their motivation. And John played this salesman who had a conscience. He also had a wife, a mistress, and a one-night stand, and I was the one-night stand. So within the piece, he was always sort of lying and irritable with his wife. He was always trying to impress with the mistress, but the one-night stand scenes were there because it was the only, because he didn't give a toss about that character. He was the only time that he was completely open and vulnerable. And I think John had quite a lot of trouble with the scenes because he as a character had to be the most vulnerable. And we shot it very late at night. So we had to kind of rush them through. And it was just, I think I'm right in saying it was just before Quentin Crisp came out. So the Naked Civil Servant came out, so that he was just on the edge of being, absolutely mega. And he kind of had that air about him of tortured genius. I don't know how else to describe it. Sounds cliche, but he was a troubled person, I would say, back then, back in the day. But the talent was just rebounding around the room. He was extraordinary to work with. Wouldn't necessarily say easy, but you never quite knew what you were gonna get. You couldn't set anything. It was very spontaneous what he wanted to do.
That's it. Talking about not necessarily being easy. I think there's been various articles recently from women who said that labeling of difficult, that you can as an actor get if you're a woman, being difficult is actually what often a lot of men are allowed to be, because that's their artistic temperament. And I know my friend Alice Lowe's talked about these things as well, which is there is a much, and I wondered whether you feel that you've observed that changing, or whether in fact it's perhaps still too predominant, that sense that for what men are allowed to do for their artistic temperament, women will be labelled as, oh well, very difficult.
I think it is changing. I think women are being heard a lot more than they were. A lot more. Well, I know they are being heard a lot more than they were. But I did Oedipus, Berkhoff's Oedipus, not so very long ago, maybe 5 years ago. And it was 11 men and me, and our publicity photos were all together. And I was the only one smiling, which I thought was really interesting in the publicity photograph. They were all very serious, the whole I'm a man. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. What do you want? My mind gave off this kind of, and I just thought, oh yeah, maybe you've been anyway, my publicity photographs are now very serious. I made a deliberate choice not to have that sort of gushing, open thing, but to have a bit more gravitas behind it. So I think we have to change alongside. We can't. It takes two, doesn't it? It takes two to form a relationship. So we have to gain in confidence in order to be heard.
I love that confidence thing. As someone who's always been facile and who finds the gravity, because I suppose that's part of being a comedian, is you always want to fall over and at the end of your finest speech, just as you get to the end of something, they go, that was very philosophical, he's fallen in the hole, and that I think that's the Laurel and Hardy psychology which remains in my brain.
Do you know what I love about Henry Normal for example, does the exact opposite. He switches it, he does fun, and then he'll come in with he's kind of turned it on his head a bit, hasn't he? I think.
That radio series is such a beautiful series, isn't it?
I cry. I mean, he makes me go in within 10 minutes. I'm welled up. He's such an honest man. That's what I love about it. The total honesty of what he gives us.
It's that the power of gentleness, which you sometimes see with Alan Bennett, where people can just listen to the voice and think that everything's very gentle, and then suddenly you realise that underneath this gentle thing, which almost looks as if it was disguised as whimsy, has an incredible truth to it as well.
Yeah. And what he does is, I suppose Henry does it too, that is that huge respect for the subject. It's not just sending someone up or slapping someone down. It isn't. There's not much cruelty in either of their work.
Well, that's what I want to ask you actually, which is one of the things, again, watching Doctor Who and watching Tenko and some and more recent work as well. That is always, it doesn't matter from what I can see ever what the material is, that you always deal with whatever you're doing with the utmost respect, because sometimes you can see people thinking, oh, I almost feel like I'm slumming it a bit in this, and people take things ironically, and there's a little bit of, they detach themselves. And it feels to me that in all your work there is always the respect for it, and an incredible conviction, whether you're talking to robots, whether you're talking to a piece of latex, whether all of those things. It never looks like it's kind of, oh, don't worry, this is all a bit of a laugh.
I don't see the point in doing it if you approach it like that. I mean, you're doing it for a different reason, aren't you? If you're doing it like that, it's the ancient art of. I probably sound a bit wanky now, but I belong to the ancient art of storytelling, and I when you hit that moment, when you're in that theatre and you literally can hear the pin drop, there's a collective holding of breath. I think you're touching storytelling from before we had houses. I think that it goes right back, and I think it's a human need to be educated and entertained through storytelling, and I'm so proud and privileged to be part of it.
Well, you've mentioned theatre a few times, and I looked at I think it was all in 1979, you could probably correct this, but looking at the run that you had at the Oxford Playhouse, where Peer Gynt, Mephisto, King Lear, I mean, it's an incredible, and I think Ian McDiarmid was part of that, certainly some of that. And I'm, again, not merely the conviction you have to have, but to be able to flip the speed of change is something that I find. And what is the kick that you can get from that, which maybe you can't necessarily get from television? That to be at the Oxford Playhouse and to be in so many great and important works. And you were Regan, weren't you, in King Lear? I think
I've done the hat trick. Actually, I've done Cordelia at the RSC, Regan at Oxford, and Big Finish. I played Goneril on audio. So yeah, I done the hat trick of the sisters. Fortnightly rep, isn't it? I mean, it's so sad that it's. I mean, what's happening to theatre is breaking my heart at the moment. It'll come back. It'll bounce back. Of course, it will, because creatives are what they are. But and I think fringe theatre stands a better chance of surviving than in the immediate future than these huge playhouses. Because we're used to working on small cast plays with no budget, Sorry, where did that start? I'm rambling now. Oh yes, the joy of fortnightly rep. The joy of fortnightly rep is rehearsing one thing and playing another. I can do it now. I mean, 13-hour days, 6-day weeks, and then the 7th day spent learning lines. And I loved it, but it was full on. There wasn't time for anything.
And you must have had as well. There's a lovely book of letters between Timothy West and Prunella Scales. I don't know if you've I'm Here, I Think, Where Are You? And I'd always thought the title must have been because they're in so many different, you forget which town you're in. But it actually wasn't. It's about, there was an elderly actor who was in the same, I think, repertory group as Timothy West, who always had just that part in the background. He was always just leaving the drinks tray, whatever. But always after a tea break, he would walk centre stage and he would go, I'm here, I think. Where are you? oh, am I not? So he never lost the hope that maybe the director would forget, and for once he would be centre stage.
Oh.
And I would imagine, in those early days as well, you must have seen so many people who had that incredible history of repertory theatre, where the strange digs, the bizarre, oh, don't go and stay there in Leeds, there's rats by the cheese, all of that kind of thing.
I actually got my best advice. It involves a swear word, so I'm going to say bleep instead of the swear word. I got my best advice from Beatrix Lehman, who was, I think, 90 when I worked with her at the RSC, and I was in the wings. I used to watch nearly every night when I wasn't on stage. I would creep down and watch from the wings. I was so hungry for it, like blotting paper, And I was watching Sebastian Shaw. Beatrix Lehman and Sebastian Shaw were playing husband and wife. And she came up to about here. She was tiny, this incredibly wrinkled, beautiful face. And she said, I'm going to give you some advice. She said, never never stand when you can sit, never sit when you can lie down, and never bleep a bad actor. It's and I was 20, 21. So it was like the best advice, really. All of that, all three things.
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, I wanted to also ask you about you seem to have an incredible drive. When I look at the amount of work that you have done since the early 1970s, and it seems that whenever, I was talking to someone who said, oh yeah, if it ever looks like there's a bit which is a bit quiet, you might go, oh, do you know what? I've got a show that I can take out. And I just wondered where that drive, the need just to go, I want to create all the time.
I'm in therapy at the minute, and it's one of the topics that I've been looking at. And you're right, I am driven, and I can't bear a day to go by without an achievement of some sort. And I don't really know where that comes from. And I could feel it drifting off. I actually stopped drinking for the last 13 months, and to kind of see what that would uncover for me. And it's uncovered this urge to write, which I'm doing quite a lot of. And I seem to be really drawn to untold stories. So I think there's deep in my psyche untold stories of historically women who haven't been recognized for what they've done and what they've achieved and how they've paved the way for the rest of us. So I think there's somewhere in my psyche that is still fighting that feminist cause with every fiber of my being.
Can I ask you, how long have you been doing therapy?
3 years.
I tried 6 months and then I had to go back on tour and return to the traditional 30-year therapy that I was in. But it was. Have you had those moments where you just go, "Oh no"? When because I had a moment of working. That first bit where you work out something where you go, "Oh no." That's the bit in the hack BBC 4, kind of film about a comedian. Oh bloody hell! Do you get that?
I've had a few eureka moments where it feels like it feels like Tetris, where these pieces just suddenly go click, 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 click. You think, oh, right, this is why I made that choice. This is why I made that choice through my life. I mean, I wish I'd done it years ago, but I think probably I wasn't ready for it properly.
It's such an interesting, because I'm always fascinated by, I've become more and more fascinated the more that I've kind of looked into that area and written things about it, which is the further away you get from your past, the sharper it comes into view.
Sorry, it's my dog.
That's all right. I love it. It's one of the great things of lockdown. I think the second Infinite Monkey Cage we did during lockdown, Chris Hadfield's dog made a sudden entrance, and I think if you're going to have a guest appearance, I think dogs are wonderful things to. I've because I know some people get. I know in fact that should be a perfect segue. If only that happened earlier, I could say, no, of course you based the character of Leela on your dog, didn't you? But you've answered that question in the past, so we don't have to do that. Otherwise,
dog, yeah, I do.
But I know I'm always because I'm also fascinated. I know that certainly creative people can be worried sometimes about things like therapy because one friend of mine who's been in therapy for a long time has post-traumatic stress disorder from being kidnapped, and tried lots of different therapists. And one therapist went, "I think we can solve all of this," and he said, "Oh, I don't want all of it solved. I've got to write a new series of a sitcom next week." And I think there's a kind of. And I don't think it is true, because I think that's one of the dangerous things where you can also be fearful that should you find out why you do something, you will lose the drive.
I do think neurosis or mental health and creativity have a cobweb connection. I think solving your problems won't lose your talent, but I think it's quite important to have had a few problems in order to create, to be in this, because it's a phrase I use a lot, but I do think storytelling is a safe place to debate dangerous issues. And if you've been through one or two dangerous issues yourself, you can raise someone else's level of awareness and create debate in society in a way that's very productive.
I think I find that in the last year, there've been so many interesting books. I don't know if you've Kerry Hudson, who's an author, who wrote a book called Lowborn about her upbringing, or also Let's Just Say the poet, his book about being brought up in care, and Alan Davis's recent book, Just Ignore Him, which is a remarkable piece of work, and I find it really.
I can't write all these down.
I'll send them to you. It's all right.
Send me an email. Yeah, send me a link.
No, sorry. Now, do you know? I do. I'm probably doing entirely the wrong interview for what the Doctor Who High Lake thing want.
Right.
I have no idea. It doesn't matter. I mean, I hope you're okay, because I just find it such an interesting area, and it's something that I love talking to people about, because I think you're right as well. I think that sense that something has occurred quite early on, which has meant the world is not quite balanced, that something is off kilter. It has played a part in many people's lives and many people's creative lives. I think it's quite often I'm amazed when I talk to people, and suddenly they go, "I just remembered when I was." And you realise how, I mean, with someone like Alan, but we'll talk about that another time. Let's do a sequel. We'll do a podcast at some point about all of this. I'd love to do that. I've got loads of questions that people have sent as well, and there's loads of other. I wanted to talk to you about. I just watched the Omega Factor, or the Omega Factor, whichever way you want to call it, again as well, which was an interesting thing to return to.
Omega is what we were told we had to call it. But I'm sure it should have been Amiga anyway. It was. It was. I think that's you're talking about women's place in drama in the late 70s. 79 we recorded that. And I've looked back at one or two, because I've written one or two for Big Finish who've taken that onto audio as well. So I revisited it. I don't sit here sadly watching myself 70s and 80s performances, but I did do that for a bit of research, and I thought then I think I made some wrong decisions. I could have made her there I was laughing at the men's jokes and serving dinner and serving drinks. I could have made a greater stand in the rehearsal room to have her more of an equal partner rather than they're just the love interest, really. But I think that was we didn't go for a second series because of Mary Whitehouse on that. She said it was too scary. So I know, isn't that a shame?
She had a thing because Face of Evil went to trouble as well, didn't it?
Yeah. She didn't like Doctor Who. Maybe she had a thing about me.
I find that there's a lovely collection of her letters. I forget which journalist put them together, but they really, you do just go, and we still see this. We still see it's dressed up as other things now. Sometimes it's but it's the same moral outrage exists in so many different ways, doesn't it? From conservative people, but they dress it in different unpleasant garb now.
I wonder how It's a Sin has been received. I haven't watched it all yet. I find it too affecting. I think it's brilliant and beautiful and needs to be told, but I have to take a couple of days break between episodes. Can't do it in one. Can't do a binge watch.
I haven't even dared start yet. I really want to watch it, but yeah, it is. Now I'm going to rattle through some of the questions we've had from now. 3 different people wanted you. There's always a lot of questions I imagine you get about the Leela doll that existed. Yeah. And I think it's John in particular said, I know she told this story before, but I would love to hear the story of Louise's mum putting the Leela doll on top of the Christmas tree.
Well, that's the story. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. It did. It came out of the box, put on the tree. And the doll looks like it's had I look like I've had a bad hair day anyway, but the doll looks like it's had a bad hair day, doesn't it? I mean, it's like this wild. And I think they just, I had a 4.5 hour photo session for that doll. anything like me at all. The costume's pretty similar, but that's about it. And yes, it went on top of the tree and I never saw it again. But my best friend, Nigel Fairs, who I collaborate with quite a lot creatively, and I've nominated him to do my eulogy when the time comes. And he's going to start it by saying, of course, she's worth more in the box.
Now this one I have no idea again, so I apologize because some of these. This is from Carl. Carl says, "How is the recording of the Ramsey Campbell audiobook The Hungry Moon going?" Now, does that mean anything to you?
Ah, yes, it not started yet. Been postponed. Lockdown problems.
Right. Good.
So I'm sorry, I can't elaborate on that. Yeah.
Now
it's beautiful, beautiful piece of writing. Anyway, yeah. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. The comedian and writer Paul Carenza, who you directed, I think, a drama school I think it was in Guildford. I think wanted to mention Midsummer Night's Dream. Of 2001, and all he wanted to say wasn't that guy who played Snout brilliant?
Yes, and I've seen him since quite recently, and Snout was brilliant, actually. He really was. And I've seen him, he's got an amazing singing voice, Ben. And he's recently become a dad. So his life is really flowering.
This is from Nurse Ratchet, but that's what she calls herself on the internet, obviously. And I wonder about this. So she said, "I haven't got a question. I just really want to say how important that Louise was as a role model for lots of girls when they were growing up." Did you have that sense at all when you were in I suppose any of that work, in particular in the 1970s, of the importance of people seeing strong characters and the fact that they had someone who wasn't, always the sidekick, or as you said, the person who basically is just the love interest, or drives the hero to wherever they need to go?
I wasn't aware at the time. I'd say I was aware around 20 years later, so around the mid-90s, when I'd go to conventions and these 20-something women would come up and ask for my autograph, and they would say, "I watched you when I was 5, 6, 7 years old and loved you and wanted to be you and pretended to be you." Me and my brother would be the Doctor and Leela, and I had no idea I was having that effect at the time as any kind of role model. No, I was just going into a kids' TV series. I thought I'd no idea it would have the impact that it did.
It's incredible. It is amazing when you see these, and there's a few people who mention that as well, that how important you were in terms of them growing up and think, well, you can be this person as well. Sometimes you can kill the other people as well. You don't have to run away screaming. As I think you do at least twice.
Oh, you've frozen.
My apologies. That was my fault, not yours. This is Bob Fisher, who wrote a lovely book called Whiffle to Full. I don't know if you've come across Bob. He writes a great column in the. Oh, can you still see me?
Tell me the name of the book again. You froze a bit on the title.
Whiffle Lever to Full, and he writes a column for the Fortean Times called Haunted Generation. He's a wonderful man, based up near Middlesbrough. And he said he wondered how much fun you had on the set of Tenko. He said it's always interesting talking to someone like Rhys Dinsdale, who will say that they had such a laugh making Threats, which still remains one of the most terrifying pieces of TV ever. I still can't watch that nuclear drama. And he said, making something that had all the bleakness of Tenko, did you also have a lot of fun on the set?
I don't think I have ever laughed so much on a set ever. And I think it was a direct effect of the very dark matter that we were having to deal with the text. Oh, you've frozen again. Are you there?
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh yeah, you're there. You're back. Good. Yeah, I think we were counteracting everything that we had to touch during the day with this very, very dark humor that we managed to find in the evenings. And we were on location for a bit, so that always bonds a company in a way that drifting in and out of the rehearsal room doesn't.
And someone, John, another John would like to know how much has, when you became a director, did that change your also attitude to acting, or did it?
Such an interesting question. Absolutely, it changed my attitude, because how can you? Because when when a sweet young thing with talent is going, why, how, you have to, you're duty bound to give them the most honest answer that's going to facilitate the best that they can give. And if you're not doing that to yourself, then it's impossible to do it to someone else. So I think I became less tricksy. I didn't realize how tricksy I was until I started teaching. And then I could start weeding the tricks out. Because when you observe it in other people, it's like holding up a mirror going, oh, you tend to do that a bit. Yeah, I became much more disciplined and I think more honest.
So, also because you're mentioning about that you're writing a lot more now as well.
Mm.
Do you think you would? Where would you like to see your writing going? Would you? Will we be seeing books? Will it be? Would you be writing more pieces that might be
Oh,
for the
scripts,
theatre?
all scripts. Yes, I wouldn't dare approach a novel, and I've only I claim the title writer with a bit of embarrassment. I feel, I have imposter syndrome. On Give me a script as an actor, and I can do something with it. I'm supremely confident that I'm good as an actor. As a writer, I'm like, do you think could I possibly? Is this a good idea? Which is why I love collaboration, because it boosts confidence and it speeds up the process. It stops me deliberating and stops that horrible thing in your head going, oh, call yourself a writer, useless. Stops it.
The
Yeah.
That's interesting you mention imposter syndrome, because I always think it's a fascinating thing for people on the outside. They can see someone like you with this tremendous confidence and the ability to go and play all these different parts. And then very often, when you see, not just with actors, with comedians, with writers, when you actually see the other side of it, it's like I wished once that there was a project I would love someone to have done, to take a photo of someone 1 minute before they go on stage, and then actually the moment they're on stage, because that transition is so remarkable, I think, sometimes, where and people can find it very hard when they see people who have successful careers or whatever, that they can't imagine that they have any nerves or that they don't believe in themselves. But of course, I think, the people who most often I've met who don't believe in themselves can be people who are I mean, Tina Fey's talked about, she's got used to her imposter syndrome. You think, Tina Fey, look where she said, she can deal with it now, but she still has little arguments with her, the imposter mind.
But that 5 minutes before a first night is like, convinced you're going to. I always work out the route, whichever theatre I'm at in the whole of the country. I work out the route from the wings to the stage door. So if in that 5 minutes I really can't bear it, I can just run out the building. I just need to know that there's a clear route that I can escape. But once you've stepped on stage, something else takes over. Something, I don't know, something moves you.
But isn't it a strange part of the human mind that you can every single night? I mean, Victoria Wood was, I think, quite well known. Here she is, the Outballs. I don't know if she's still got that record, but a hell of a long run there. One of undoubtedly, I think, the most loved comedians that has ever existed. And every night, thinking this is the night I get found out, and I find that human strange, which goes, this is the night it doesn't work. This is the night everyone turns. It's a very odd part of the creative mechanism, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But I think if there isn't just an element of doubt, then you're not doing it right. I don't know why it's necessary, but it's just part of the recipe. I think vulnerability is strength. That's the contradiction, isn't it? If you're emotionally naked, then there has to be doubt in there, doesn't there? And there also has to be creative genius. You've frozen again.
Have I?
Or have you? Yes.
I was listening also in a very still manner. So I was also doing that. I can't remember. What's his name? Hartford, the brilliant guy who does all the more. Have
Sorry, you're breaking up. I can't
let's see. Is there anything I can change here?
can't hear you. You've gone. Can you hear me?
Now, am I back? Can you see me again?
Yes, you're back. You're back.
I'm sorry about that. It's all my fault. It keeps bouncing between different Wi-Fi's. Next door's Wi-Fi every now and again. No, I was just going to say there's someone that I've worked with who their quality of listening is so kind of just sculptural almost that you have no idea whether they're frozen or not. And you have to just keep looking, and then you go, "Oh no, it's okay. Oh no, you haven't frozen. You really were listening with incredible intensity." I will ask you, because we've come to the end really, and there were many other questions I'd like to ask you about. I would like to, if there was any piece of your work that Big Finish could revive, so it doesn't matter what the genre is. Are there any particular characters in particular you think I would love to go back to that character?
Well, going back to Mark Gatiss's question, I was negotiating the next series when I discovered I was pregnant, and had to drop out of the Tenko cast. Of course, my beautiful son, now with his own beautiful sons. Of course, you can't swap a TV series for all that joy that's brought. But Blanche wasn't finished for me. I think she still has some life in her.
And that's such as well that sense of the unfinished character. That's one of the things that I love as well, which is all of those characters were so well drawn and so well played that you can keep going back to them and imagining where are they in 1956, where are they in 1961. There's how also do you find it? I'm thinking of with there's a generation of creative people who they're fans, and they've now so for instance, you working with Mark, it's like going, oh brilliant, I know who, and I think of all those things, with also what's his name, Jackson, the when you see the casting, when Christopher Lee was suddenly being cast by all of these people who had been brought up on Hammerfield. And there's something that I find really delightful at the fact that people, but people like Mark and all of the League lot as well, and others as well, just go, hang on a minute, I know who I want to work with, and I know who will be brilliant. And also they have that, I wonder, that first meeting sometimes where you have with people who think this was one of the most important moments when they were sat there on a Saturday evening or whenever it was, and now they're actually, you're working with them. How do you find
my very first autograph as Leela, for Leela, we'd been recording, it was my first day's filming at Ealing, and I'd gone to have a shower, and there was a knock on my dressing room door, wrapped up in a towel, and I opened it, and there's a little boy there with a pencil and paper going, will you sign this? His dad was doing sound next door, and this little boy was a big Doctor Who fan, and he heard that there was a new companion and no one had seen her or met her, and he had the bravery to come and find me, find my dressing room. Turns out it was Gary Russell, who, was huge with Big Finish, and then employed me in the 90s, so my whole Big Finish career goes right back to that one moment with that little boy with his pencil and paper at my dressing room door in 1976.
And that's also a great lesson, isn't it, in why being nice to people is worthwhile.
Thank goodness I was nice
to know. Yeah.
I got no, bugger off and shut the door. We wouldn't be here.
I can't remember who was talking about this the other day, but I think it's also it's the truest thing is always judge people by how they treat the person who they're working with, who's got the least amount of power.
I was casting something the other day, and it was absolutely down to two young men, could not decide between the two young men. So I went out and said to the receptionist, which of those two was nicest to you on the way in and on the way out? And that's what then cast. Yeah. It's not that the other one was rude, but one of them had really taken time to go, hello, thank you very much, goodbye. on the way out. So I thought, right, okay.
Yeah, I remember a friend. In fact, we should be very careful. I won't name any names.
Don't name names.
But I just remember a friend of mine saying, and then I suddenly thought, oh my God, I'd have to spend 3 months with him in the middle of Africa. And I was like, no, I'm not casting him. He's very good, but I can't stand that. The final question then is, when will we find out the secrets of Disciple of Death? You don't have to mention anything about Disciple of Death.
You're going to have everybody Googling now, aren't you?
But that's the problem, isn't it? You can't escape, because I watched an interview that you did probably over 20 years ago, one of those ones where, I can't remember what they're called, where I know Tom Baker did one and quite a few other people, where you basically went round to someone's house and you kind of sit on their sofa and they chat to you. You remember There's Something and Dining, yeah. It was called. And he brought up Disciple of Death, and I saw you kind of go, ugh. And you were like going, how do you know about that? And this is the terrible thing now, isn't it? Is because of the nature of the internet, it's inescapable. Yeah. What previously you had to rummage through all manner of documents. I found out the secret film.
Oh, I'm sure it's not as bad as I built it up in my imagination, but it's not my finest hour.
Did you have any points in the early, those early times where you would find yourself on a set and just think, oh my God, I'm not sure this, not just the thing itself, but as a career in itself, again, talking about that dealing with doubt, that dealing with, will the possibilities arrive?
I don't think I've ever really thought career path. I'm quite a rare animal in that respect. It's just been like, okay, what's next? It's apart from Doctor Who, which was a very deliberate choice to get into a TV series. I don't think I've ever made a deliberate choice. It's just what's interesting out there, what's happening, who wants me.
Brilliant.
I'm here. I'm grateful.
Thank you so much. And,
thank you, Robin.
What
a joy.
About Philip Ridley and Vincent River, which I never got the chance to see.
Oh, Vincent River.
Can we talk about that next time? Because I love Philip's work.
Okay.
Thanks very much, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. And and I think I'm doing something later on with Toby Haydock and others. So I might see you.
Give him my love.